Good afternoon. Can we give a round of applause for our announcer, my friend, Chief Steve Sem in Orange County? Just wanted to make sure I acknowledged him. So again, thank you and good afternoon to all of you. The passage of Senate Bill 678 had interesting timing for me personally. I became probation chief in Ventura County in 2010, and that was the year that 678 went into effect. And like you've heard earlier, the Ventura County Probation Agency was no different than a lot of your county departments. We lacked a lot of resources and services for our adult clients. We knew that there were particular kinds of programs and services that we wanted for our clients. We just didn't have the funding or the infrastructure to make it work, to make it happen. Those years were a tumultuous time in California for public safety issues. As mentioned before, there was unprecedented prison overcrowding with the federal court order to reduce prison population or face arbitrary releases, while many other public policies were made at the ballot box through initiatives. At the same time, we in probation knew that following the research behind evidence-based practices, we could be an efficient option to enhance public safety in our communities while helping address the crisis facing the state. As many of you know, this was not long after juvenile justice realignment, and probation was already working in full swing to advance evidence-based practices for our juvenile clients. We finally had resources in place locally for our youth, and we were already starting to see a lot of success. Now, I remember as a new chief at the time, our Adult Services Committee here at CPOC was working diligently to come up with a proposal to get this same kind of attention focused on our adult population. At that time, it was unheard of to ask for resources from the state for adult probation clients, and we knew the challenge ahead was going to be extremely difficult. The committee saw this as an opportunity to attract attention and getting resources to a population that had historically been underfunded and under-resourced. Now, before lunch, you heard a little from Senator Leno about how tenuous it was to maneuver the policy structure of 678 through the legislature on a bipartisan vote and ultimately secure a signature from then Governor Schwarzenegger. Against all odds, and there were many, we were able to do it together. And as we are hearing today, it's probation's own Cinderella story, with success not just at our state and our local levels, but also for the safety of our communities and the lives of our clients. In Ventura County, like many of your counties, it's been transformative. We have additional personnel to monitor adult cases. We have caseloads that are manageable. We have the ability to link our clients to quality resources in the community, and we even have funding to track the data just to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. Now, it's your treat and my treat, because we get to hear from some of the people who were here and lived through the entirety of SB 678, each one with a very unique perspective and viewpoint about the road that made this a reality. Your program says that retired probation chief Matt Jenkins was going to be the moderator. He got hung up in San Francisco, so I will stay up here and be the moderator. So I'm going to ask our esteemed panel to come on up, and I will introduce them as they make their way. The first is the Honorable Lawrence Brown, appointed to Sacramento Superior Court by Governor Schwarzenegger in 2010. In addition to maintaining a very busy felony calendar, Judge Brown presides over several specialty courts, such as Adult Drug Court, Mental Health Treatment Court, and Reentry Court, just to name a few. In addition to being a leader in his county, and he's recognized at the state level, He serves as a vice chair of the Judicial Council's Collaborative Justice Courts Advisory Committee. He's recognized as Behavioral Health Champion by the California Behavioral Health Directors Association, and he was recognized just this past year by CPOC as Judicial Officer of the Year. Prior to his appointment to the bench, Judge Brown served in several roles within the justice system, including a former deputy district attorney in Ventura County, serves as the executive director for the California District Attorneys Association, and first assistant United States attorney for 5 years, as well as the interim U.S. attorney in 2009. Welcome, Judge Brown.
Thank you.
Lenore Anderson is the president and founder of Californians for Safety and Justice, an attorney with extensive experience and an impressive career working to improve the criminal justice system. Prior to her work on several reform efforts and campaigns, Ms. Anderson worked in several roles with the local government system. Chief of Policy and Chief of Alternative Programs Division at the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, where she focused on initiatives to reduce recidivism and improve public safety. Also as the Director of Public Safety for the Oakland Mayor and Director of San Francisco Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. In addition to her work within government, she's played extensive roles in efforts to reform our justice system, serving as the director of Books Not Bars while at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights and co-founded the Center for Youth Wellness. Welcome, Ms. Anderson. Shelly Kern serves as the director of the Judicial Council's California's Criminal Justice Services Office, where she leads a team of 25 attorneys, researchers, and analysts to implement the Judicial Council's priorities related to criminal and traffic law and procedure. Among other initiatives, Ms. Kern's work there also includes research and analysis for key work groups appointed by the Chief Justice, most recently work being done regarding the implementation of pretrial detention reform in California. Ms. Curran has played an important role in the council's work during this past decade on such key reforms that would impact the court's responsibilities, such as criminal justice realignment, pretrial reform, adult collaborative courts, evidence-based practices, and community supervision. Of particular note for this audience, Ms. Kern's team works closely with probation to implement SB 678. Prior to joining the Judicial branch of government in 2009, Ms. Curran served the state legislature as principal policy consultant to the President Pro Tem of the Senate on matters relating to public safety. Welcome, Ms. Curran. Okay, so now I'm going to start asking questions. We're going to alternate, and it's going to be a free-flowing, informal dialogue. We'll start with Ms. Curran. You were working in the legislature and actually was instrumental in writing the bill. Tell us about what was happening in the state that set the stage for SB 678.
Well, first I want to say thank you for having me here today. Whenever Karen asks me to come and speak to probation, I'll clear my calendar. I absolutely love and appreciate this group very much, so thanks for having me. I did have the opportunity to work on SB 678 when it was making its way through the legislature. And I think there was a bit of a perfect storm. Some of the things have already been mentioned today. An astronomical prison overcrowding crisis in California. You would go into the state prisons and there would be people literally bunked in gymnasiums in common areas because the overcrowding crisis was so incredible. 3-judge panel came forward and said you absolutely have to reduce the number of people who are in your adult facilities. And then also we had probation failure rates at the time in the state hovering around 50%. So there were significant things going on, not to mention an astounding fiscal crisis that the state was dealing with at the time. At the time, we were spending about $129 a day to house someone in state prison, whereas probation would cost $30. So that was the negative side of what was happening. The positive side was evidence-based practices were really beginning to take root. People recognized that we could do better, and by doing better, we could have more effective outcomes. Arizona had begun to take on some reforms. Senator Lenore spoke earlier about the work that he was doing, working with his Republican colleagues to move that forward. And also another thing that was really important is you all were really demonstrating that the benefits of effective work within the community. And I think of two examples. One has to do with the non-707Bs that were realigned a few years before, and one of the speakers earlier mentioned that. So the work that you all did with juveniles, I think, really sent a message to state legislators. And then also there were small grants that had happened the year before that went to Alameda County and Los Angeles County to work on more effective practices at the local level in order to keep people from going to state prison. So I think it was a bit of a perfect storm, and because of that perfect storm, we had great leadership among our elected officials in California, and they were able to push through the benefit, and we're still reaping the benefits today for the work that happened then.
Great. Just a quick follow-up on that. The bill had bipartisan support. Senator Lenore talked about that today, something that's not typical in California when it comes to criminal justice bills. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think sometimes when there's a fiscal crisis, you get strange bedfellows, right? And it was recognition that something needed to change. So I think that was one significant thing. Also, again, as I said before, that rise of evidence-based practice and the fact that 678 was written in a way that still held individuals accountable, protected the public, and then also recognized the real possibility that for redemption. And that was something that people were thinking about in Sacramento a lot at the time. And then finally, I'll come out and say this, it was really good public policy. It was a great idea that someone had that they were able to push forward. And I think members of the legislature, both Republicans and Democrats, recognize that, and therefore we're willing to work with you all and take that risk and get that legislation enacted.
Thank you. Question for you, Judge Brown. As a follow-up to some of Ms. Kern's comments, I want to tap your recollection during your time as Executive Director of CDAA. Your role there brought you into contact with the legislature and the administration on public safety matters, where you were often advocating for policies and funding. Can you describe what the tenure of debate on public policy or public safety issues over a decade ago?
Well, first of all, also let me say thank you for the invitation to be here today. I normally be presiding over one of my 2 mental health treatment courts, which is one of my favorite assignments, so it takes a lot for me to miss that court, and you all are worth it. I'm a little depressed, though. I've never seen the governor in person, and what's the deal with all that hair? I find myself missing Jerry Brown considerably right about now. I also, just for my birthday recently, thank you for the birthday card, Chief Seal. Someone gave me, I got one of these Apple Watches, and I keep checking. I have an elevated heart rate now. So if something happens, I hope someone comes to my rescue, okay? Actually, my experience with the legislative stuff goes 15 to 20 years ago. And when I came into the California DA's Association with my boss, ironically, who's the DA of Ventura County, Greg Totten, we came in at the height, of the zenith of all the tough on crime legislation. Just in 1994, our first year, we were out-toughed on the 3 strikes law. We sponsored the narrower 3 strikes bill to require the current strike be serious or violent with the state sheriffs, and that wasn't tough enough. And for a number of years, I will just tell you, I think we all know, those of us who have been around for a while, it was a punitive era. And it was very much born of a sense that the laws had become too lenient in the other direction. And so a lot of the legislation dealt with increasing sentences and reducing credits and those sorts of things, and without any real regard for what it might do to the prison population. Had they required that the bills had in it within an appropriation to build the more prisons for these increase in sentences, it probably would have gone a much different direction. And I mean, I've been on the court now for 10 years. I was on the court for just about a year when AB 109 realignment passed in a felony home court, and marveled at the significant abrupt change that occurred seemingly overnight, born of that budget crisis in particular. So no, these are very, very different days. And I think what we see, and it's odd to now be 30 years in the legal profession, I'm old enough now to see pendulum swings. And the best we can do is at the local level is we implement the laws with zeal that are passed by the policymakers, whatever those are. And a lot of great changes are coming about, I believe. I don't agree with all of the changes, but certainly to the extent that something like SB 678 recognizes the importance of probation and puts more into your hands to supervise our population, help them turn lives around, there's nothing more important to me than that part of this reform. Thank you.
Ms. Anderson, you've too seen the system from different vantage points. Much of your work has been related to implementing programs within the system, but have spent the last decade really trying to promote reforms to the criminal justice system. What is your opinion the most important thing for implementing successful reform? And more specifically, what worked in your view with SB 678 implementation?
Well, as you all know, implementation is easy peasy, right? I'm a former assistant district attorney, and I was really grateful for the time that I worked inside the criminal justice system, both in the DA's office as well as in partnership with local law enforcement in both San Francisco and Oakland, because as an advocate, that's the hat I usually wear, but those 5 years inside government really helped me understand what it actually takes to change systems and how extraordinarily difficult that work can be. And so as a reformer and as an advocate, founded criminal justice reform advocacy organization, Californians for Safety and Justice in 2012. And so for the last 8 years, advancing policy reform has been at the top of our list of to-dos, but it's always been clear to me that changing a public policy is actually easier. That's almost the first step to advancing real change. It's the easy part of it. The much harder part is systems change. And the much harder part of it is the role that you all play in administrating large systems and trying to change them and morph them to keep up with policy change, and then have that policy change be a positive experience for everyday people and the people that you work with at the community level. So we recognize that policy change is not the end all be all, but it is an incredibly important part of it. I think when it comes to implementing reforms in a way that's successful, there's a key thing that I think SB 678 has done that we have seen in other reforms go well and less well. And that is there an actual partnership at the community level between government and residents, right? We've got to bridge the gap that often exists between communities that the criminal justice system serves and the criminal justice system agencies themselves. When that gap can be bridged, I think is when we see criminal justice reform successfully implemented. My understanding of the innovation that has occurred under the 678 era is that much of that innovation has come from those partnerships, has come from the ability for probation departments to work with community organizations, work with residents to build new and innovative ways to serve people on probation and also address the cycle of crime and the drivers of crime. So I think bridging that gap between community and the local criminal justice system is something that 678 has spurred and something that has been really important in terms of the success of that effort. Interestingly, when we look at other criminal justice reforms, among the things that has been successful outside of the 678 world has actually been direct engagement with other stakeholders and with everyday people, mainstream media, talking directly to voters, really elevating the issues of, listen, this is what the challenges are that our criminal justice system faces, and here are some of the real solutions. A lot of the attention outside of 678 has been around the prison system. It has been around incarceration. There's been less attention paid to what you all do every day. And I think that in terms of building popular support for smart approaches to criminal justice, that engagement with voters and with other stakeholders in business and faith and elsewhere outside of the justice system, that engagement has been incredibly important. What I think the opportunity now is to bring the issue of probation, bring probation system needs to those stakeholders as well. That conversation around criminal justice reform that we're facing in the state right now needs to be able to shine a light on the remarkable progress that probation has already made and the emerging role that probation can play in public safety solutions. So I think we can learn some lessons from how mainstream engagement and popularizing of this notion of the need for changes in our criminal justice system has benefited other reforms, but then now bring that attention to the remarkable progress you've already made and what needs to come next. So I think there's some engagement there. The last thing I would offer on the subject of implementation and what I've seen probation departments do so well that I think the rest of the criminal justice system can also benefit from is a willingness to lean into the change and a willingness to try and figure it out and figure out how to make it work. If there's only one thing that I've learned in the time that I've been working on criminal justice reform, it's that humility matters probably more than anything. There is no silver bullet here to the problems we face, either at the community level as it relates to crime and violence, or in the criminal justice system as it relates to having an effective system. So the more humility that everyone can bring, all the stakeholders, getting out of these polarized debates, getting out of the blame game, getting out of the game of which system is actually at fault, which set of hyperbolic ways of talking about these issues is real, moving away from all of that and having humility and a willingness to engage in a relationship across different stakeholders. I think that matters so much. And, I am heartened by how much I see different probation departments across the state looking to do that, looking to actually engage in real conversations. Let's roll up our sleeves. The law has changed. What do we do now? Let's build new partnerships and make it work.
Thank you. We're going to circle back to Judge Brown. You had different roles within the system in your career. You mentioned a little bit about it. Prior to the passage of SB 678, I'd like to talk to you specifically about your role as prosecutor. This was a time where resources for adult supervision were limited. Can you capture for us the difference to the criminal justice system post SB 678?
Well, let me first note, though, since I have a friend in the audience, and it's not from my probation department, with my fancy watch, while I was talking earlier, I received a series of messages that says, and I quote, "No one asked you for your life story, sorry." But seemingly I have been asked, so I will now explain. Thank you very much. Look, I think, again, where I look at it is much more even up until 10 years ago. When I came on the court in the beginning of 2010, it was the way it always was. You either, on a felony, granted probation, or you denied probation, and they went to state prison, and they were the state's responsibility, and they were on parole when they got out. It was as simple as that. And as budget cuts came along to the probation departments, then increasingly you had banked caseloads where there couldn't be the kind of proactive interaction with probationers that department wanted to do. And instead, oftentimes, it was just a status when they got a new case that there was a probation violation, or maybe law enforcement wanted to use the search terms and all that. And really, I think where we are compared to where that was is to bring greater focus on who is the person, not just what they did, and to make that be part of kind of the mores of our justice system now. I do believe that to be different than it was when I was a prosecutor or before I became a judge. And that really it was only in those collaborative courts, like drug courts, somewhere down the hallway, which are kind of marginalized. Like that's the hug-a-thug court. They actually hug these people. They clap. They get invested in their life stories. what the hell's going on in that department down the hallway? And I think our challenge now is to take so many of the underpinnings of that approach and graft it into our everyday work. Not for the most violent offenders, not for the worst sex offenders. I think we all know we need some number of state prison beds for certain folks. But for those who are going to be kept in our counties, whether on an 1170H or on a probation grant, it's working with that person, figuring out what makes them tick. So another big difference, of course, is I never knew what a risk assessment tool was as a prosecutor. I'd be skeptical as a prosecutor now if I heard about you all giving a score. And that's back to Lenore's comments about the challenge of implementing so many of these things is drinking the Kool-Aid and getting people to do just that. A number of my colleagues still aren't quite as far along. I'm not patting myself on the back. It's just when you do a lot of collaborative court work, you start to see the wisdom of this approach. But having it where your line district attorney also embraces some of these ideas, and whatever judge gets the case assigned to them embraces these ideas. And that's where it falls to you all, to build those relations with your presiding judge, with your stakeholders, to say it's a new, different way that we're doing things. And it is different than when I was growing up in the justice system, to be sure.
Thank you. Since this room is filled with probation professionals, we're going to stay on the topic of probation's role. Ms. Anderson, some of us have heard you describe the role of probation in the system. Can you share your thoughts on probation's place in the justice system for the room to understand? And as a follow-up to that, what's the most important in your experience for people to understand about probation?
Well, I'll take them in reverse order. We do a lot of public opinion research. We try and keep up to date with what everyday Californians think. And there's a mythology that exists, which is the choices when responding to crime are incarceration or nothing. And that's a mythology that we see in the media on a regular basis. And that's very concerning, that is sort of the common wisdom that's out there for people who aren't working in these systems or who aren't affected by these systems, that those are really your choices. You either incarcerate or nothing. And I think that that is an opportunity to tell a new story about what accountability looks like and what stopping cycles of crime looks like. If we can start to engage the public in a real conversation around how the criminal justice system works and in the pivotal role that probation departments play, I think we can have a lot of allies and a lot of supporters among everyday Californians. There's a reason that mythology exists, right? This is the state that built more prisons than it did colleges for many years. This is a state that kind of led the nation in many of the tough on crime policies. And so in reversing course, it's not surprising that conversation is still sort of over here in the world of prisons or nothing. And so what we need to do is engage the public in elevating the role of you all, right? The sort of invisible elephant in the room. The vast majority of people going into the criminal justice system actually go to your agencies. They don't go into incarceration. And so it's important that the everyday resident understands who you are and what you do and can embrace that role. My sense of probation when it comes to stopping cycles of crime and responding to crime, probation is really the promise of community accountability in the most effective way possible, right? It's really an opportunity to hold people accountable in a way that preserves and protects communities and families, and in a way that can address crime drivers, right? That is not what we get when we focus all of our time and energy on the back end. That's not what we get if we just look the other way either, right? So what you all provide is a real opportunity for everyday people to understand what accountability looks like and to think differently about how we go about advancing public safety. The research is really clear. A prison has limited success rates, limited ability to hold the vast majority of people accountable in a way that reduces recidivism, and it's also extraordinarily costly, right? So the opportunity is to say, look at what probation is doing. Let's partner across probation and community. Let's connect treatment with supervision, and let's stop the cycle of crime locally in a way that everyday Californians can embrace. I think if some of the remarkable innovations that you all are doing were understood by voters, they would be clamoring for more. The one thing that we know, we're recovering from an era of over-incarceration. Californians across the political spectrum do not want more money going to prisons. Every Californian also wants safe communities, right? Unquestionably. And so we have not done a good job painting a picture for Californians of what that safety looks like. You all are key in that. If we can help Californians understand what combining treatment looks like with what you all do, I think that the future is going to be really bright.
Thank you. Ms. Curran, I want to go back to the specific legislation. You left the legislature soon after the bill was passed and went to the Judicial Council. The JCC has specific duties under SB 678. Tell us about the work the JCC did to assist in the implementation of the new law, and how did it roll out?
Sure. Since the beginning of SB 678, we have been partners with probation in rolling some of this stuff out, at least from the state perspective. So at the very beginning, the Judicial Council was involved in the legislation itself, right? The JC took a position on the bill. And then as part of the responsibilities specifically included in the legislation, the Judicial Council has specific roles. So for example, as many of you know, we get quarterly data from all of you. We do an annual report to the legislature talking about how things are going. We include recommendations for ways that we think things can improve. And then we've also been partnered at the very beginning. Earlier today, Senator Lenore referenced that burn JAG money, the ARA funds that came down. And so we worked with probation, with CPOC, to figure out how those initial dollars would be disseminated. And then going forward, we've been working very closely with the Department of Finance annually when we report to the Department of Finance about the probation failure rates in order to help develop the governor's budget in terms of allocations that are going to probation departments. I also want to say another role that we have played in all of this is, as these other really fundamental changes have happened in California, SB 678 has had to change also. So when realignment happened, when Proposition 47 happened, to some extent, we had to go back to the drawing board, and because the baseline that was in effect in the early years didn't make sense after that, right? And so we had to go back and tweak the legislation to figure out how to account for, post-release community supervision, how to account for the fact that people were not eligible to go to county jails anymore weren't eligible to go to state prison anymore. They were going to county jail. And so trying to think through, in partnership with CPOC and also the Department of Finance and the legislature, the best way to preserve the benefits of SB 678, right? And so make it so you all would want to continue to work on this stuff and do that sales job to some extent to the legislature and to the administration to help them understand that even if an individual is not being revoked to state prison anymore, instead they're being revoked to county jail, by keeping someone from doing that, it's also the benefit of the state, right? And so working again in partnership on all of the fundamental policy changes that have happened with 678 along the road.
Thank you. Let's skip on too, because I see we have limited time left. I'm going to ask a question, ask any of you to answer it. Looking back at 10 years of implementation, did anything surprise you in this effort?
I'll give it a shot. I guess I'm most surprised by the fact that we're all sitting in this room right now talking about 678, and everyone knows what it is, right? So oftentimes legislation is passed and it doesn't have nearly the profound impact that SB 678 did, right? We all know 678. You have conversations with other people who are even tangentially aware of and involved with the criminal justice system, and they know what 678 is. And so it surprises me. I was hopeful at the time, but I didn't realize exactly how successful it will be. I'll tell one quick story. As the budget was being enacted that year, people were hustling around trying to find savings, right? How much savings can we score? And so they looked at how much savings are we going to score from 678? And I thought, oh boy, how much money are we going to score from 678? And I said, I don't know, $25 to $40 million in a year. And y'all blew that out of the water, right? Coming out the gate immediately, it was far more successful. And so I was surprised by just how successful the legislation has been.
Good. Judge Brown or Ms. Anderson?
I wouldn't say I have any big surprise. I would say this, though, that I think I marvel at that we are making changes in the justice system. And I don't think the policymakers always understand how difficult that can be to start to get buy-in and have it become normalized. I mean, we're all good about implementing new laws as they arise. But then this next step of actually embracing what is being attempted. And in a way, I think this idea of kind of unsiloing what's been done in some of the collaborative court type work over time, or in the juvenile courts in particular, and grafting that into the more general caseload, and getting people to understand that that is the way a good sentence gets created, is having a focus on the person with some treatment and accountability and all that. And I will note that among my colleagues, certainly I note that those who have been appointed in more recent years are more readily amenable to taking on those types of approaches. It's the older guard that this is still kind of a big change and there's still some skepticism. But I just recently had raised the training idea with my colleagues about doing kind of a treatment-focused felony sentencing program outside of the collaborative courts. But just here's how you route somebody to residential treatment, or here's how you get somebody connected with a peer navigator to go to the mental health treatment program. And the interest by my colleagues was overwhelming. And so in the beginning of April, I'll put on a training program, and I'll then turn to Chief Seal and Julie Weary and the crew and put something together. So I think that, to me, I wasn't sure when 109 happened and things like we're talking about here, whether it was going to be of short duration or whether this was going to be sort of a more permanent shift. And it feels very much like this is a true permanent shift. We still have a lot of work to do, I believe, at the local level, making sure that we all trust one another and that we get buy-in case by case. And frankly, and I'll finish on this point, to me, I guess my bias, having been the head of the State District Attorney Association so long ago, and maybe your counties are different, but in many counties, I believe you have to have the elected district attorney has to buy in to these type of changes. And they have to then make it clear from the front office to their troops that the office supports this as well, so that the line prosecutor understands that the front office wants these type of outcomes in cases, because otherwise you're going to have fight after fight after fight, and so much of our stuff gets resolved by way of a plea bargain that it comes down to, right, programming those young pup prosecutors and public defenders who handle 90% of the cases coming through, and get them to understand what you all do, what resources are there, what is an adult day reporting center, what is a risk assessment tool, why do we use that tool, what does that number mean, and how should that then impact the way that we craft this sentence? Because until you get to that, it's just sort of money that creates bodies, but doesn't create the philosophical change that I think we're still working on. That's my thought.
Ms. Anderson?
I think, both 678 and all the other changes that have happened over the last 10 years, I mean, what a remarkable difference 10 years makes in terms of consensus building. I think that's been the most surprising thing that I've observed is just how quickly, really across the country, there's a consensus that the old way of doing business isn't appropriate anymore, and there's a new way of advancing criminal justice that's about smart public safety approaches that don't waste resources and don't over-rely on incarceration. That new consensus around what doesn't work anymore is wremarkable. The next phase of the conversation then is, how do we build consensus around what we want instead? Where are we going with justice reform and crime policy? I think that there remains an immense debate about what the priorities should be. And I think that probation chiefs have a huge role in defining that for the public and defining that at the community level. We know what works. We know what some of the key drivers of crime are. It's not mysterious in y'all's lines of work. The role of unaddressed mental health issues, the role of unaddressed substance abuse issues, elevating the need to really build out that infrastructure for mental health, build out that infrastructure for substance abuse at the local level in a way that's accessible to all community members is going to be a key part of defining what the new approach to public safety looks like. One thing I want to mention that we have been talking about more and more is the role of unaddressed trauma. I think that as experts, your voice on this topic would be really well received. I think that the public needs to understand what is at the root of so much of the problems that people experience at the community level and what the real solutions are. And for us, unaddressed trauma is the main driver, right? It's the main reason that so many incidents of crime and violence happen. And if we could get serious about talking about that and talking about what that means and getting away from the sort of TV movie version of where crime and violence comes from, I think there'd be a real opportunity to build out new investments. Before I started doing the work I'm doing now, I was in the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice in San Francisco, and this is pre-678, we were looking at what we could do to reduce the number of young people going into then the California Youth Authority. And I was assigned the task of reviewing all of the case files of young people who were on probation, either in a camp or having been sent to then the YA, to evaluate what were the patterns in the lives of young people on probation. And I can tell you there was not a single review in which that young person had not been a victim of crime long before they ever got involved as someone who committed a crime. It was just an extraordinarily devastating experience to over and over and over again, and you all know this is your work every day, encounter people who are now at the point of being involved in the criminal justice system when there was an earlier trauma that was frankly disregarded by all the systems that touched those young people. And that is a public safety crisis. Unlike the one that we hear about on the news, unlike the ones that often get the public's attention, there is this underlying reality of unaddressed trauma contributing to the very problems that the criminal justice system has to deal with later. I think the solutions are there, and I think that you all can be a lead voice in figuring out what it looks like to address trauma at the local level through mental health, through trauma recovery services, and through substance abuse to make our communities much safer.
Great, thank you. We're almost out of time. I'm just going to open it up to the panel again. Final thoughts. You have a room full of probation professionals. Is there anything more that we need to do as a profession to keep pushing the spirit of 678 forward?
Like I said, I again, at the local level, it's all about you guys having those relationships with your district attorney, your public defender, your sheriff, and everybody trying to speak the same language as much as possible, and then bringing those lessons down to the folks day to day. Because I know you have, just like with the deputy DAs, you all have officers who are going to be somewhat more resistant to some of the things that we talk about at programs like this than other officers might be. And so it's an ongoing education, I believe, of the people who dedicate their lives to work in our criminal justice system each and every day, to get them to have shared visions as to what it is we're trying to do.
Thank you. Any final thoughts?
I guess I would just echo some of what Judge Brown said about the importance of collaboration. When we have looked at various programs over the course of the last 10 years, whether it's 678 or parolee reentry courts, or the CalRAP program that was referenced, again and again and again, the issue that comes out where people have the best outcomes is when there's collaboration at the local level, right? When systems are working together, identifying the needs of the individual that is coming before the court, or working with you all and figuring out the best solutions for that individual person. And then the other thing that I would say is continuing to partner with us to embrace these changes. When I worked for the legislature, we worked on SB 678. It all seemed like a very good idea when I was sitting in my office kind of negotiating the bill with others, and then I went to the JCC and thought, oh my goodness, this is much tougher than I thought to actually make this stuff happen and do the work that we need to do. So I would just ask and encourage to continue the partnerships, right, and continue to do the great work that you all are doing. And again, I just really appreciate the opportunity to come and spend some time with you this afternoon.
Ditto. All sounds good to me. Yeah, no, I mean, it's, I think that, California is at another turning point, and I think that this is one that could really cement a strong shared safety future, and I think the role of probation, I guess the key of part of what I'm sharing today is getting your voice out there more, so the public can have an opportunity to appreciate what's possible locally.
Great. Please join me in thanking our panel. Thank you.
And now we will take our final last break of the day. Please enjoy a 15-minute break. There is desserts and refreshments